who is our own David Radcliffe. Now, David, he's sort of fairly quiet about his background, but is an engineer, and he was an academic, and he has a long-held interest in the social history of engineering. And he's also somebody with sort of meticulous skills for finding out historical information and putting it together. And he has a particular interest in the two engineers, Malcom Moore and Albert Longoni. So we're looking forward to hearing from you, David, if you're ready to speak to us this evening. Thank you.
All right. So good evening. In 2016, Janet Bellatho wrote an article on the web page about Malcom Moore Pty Ltd, and this evoked a large response from the readers. Many shared fond memories of Malcom Moore in the 60s and 70s and 80s. In June, one reader, who's actually listening on the line tonight, asked if anyone remembered his grandfather, Albert Longoni, a Swiss-born engineer who'd worked at Malcom Moore in the 1930s. So this presentation explores Malcom Moore, the engineer, and how his story intersects with that of Albert Longoni. So this is an aerial view photograph of the manufacturing facilities of Malcom Moore Pty Ltd at Williamstown Road in Port Melbourne in 1981. They stretched from Bertie Street to Bridge Street, centred around the site where Bunnings is today. Many will remember this sprawling factory complex and the machines that emerged from it. Malcom Moore went out of business in 1986. All that remains is the former crane factory building on Bertie Street, but more of that later. This is the structure of Malcom Moore Pty Ltd in 1981. On the right-hand side, you can see that there were 6 distinct design and manufacturing divisions, each based on one type of product: cranes, conveyors, machine tools, hydraulics, and so on. There are also branch offices across Australia and a separate marketing arm. Note the blue oval-shaped Moore badge. This is the third and final badge design that the company used, and you'll see some of the other ones during the talk. In 1981, Malcom Moore was a private company, part of the Portland House group of companies. That's the David Haynes family company. Over the years, the ownership and structure of Malcom Moore changed several times. I'll indicate these changes during the presentation. Also in 1981, I had my first encounter with Malcom Moore at Mount Isa Mines in far northwest Queensland. As a young engineer, I was part of a research team looking at ways to improve the design and ergonomics of load-haul dump vehicles. Pictured here is an LU 503, a load-haul dump vehicle designed and manufactured by Malcom Moore in Port Melbourne. I was not to know then that 4 decades later, I would be conducting research on the history of this company and its founder. Now let me take you back 100 years, from the 1980s to the 1880s, to the era that gave rise to this once iconic Australian company. This is the story of 2 innovative engineers, Malcom Moore, who founded the company, and Albert Longoni, who brought specialised design expertise to it at a critical time in its history. They were born within a year of each other, but on opposite sides of the world. Both came from families who ran businesses, so they were both exposed to mercantile matters at an early age. How they came to collaborate is a fascinating tale. Malcolm Stewart Moore was born in Brisbane in February 1888. Here he is as a baby. His father, John, was an ironmonger who worked for the Brisbane branch of Alfred Shaw and Co. His mother, Amelia, came from Melbourne and was the daughter of Alfred Shaw. Now, Alfred Shaw and Co. imported machinery, hardware, crockery, and had retail outlets in Melbourne, Brisbane, and London. And Malcolm had 2 siblings. This is the Albert Shaw Company display at the Intercolonial Exhibition in Brisbane. In 1895, Albert Shaw went bust, and as a consequence, the Moore family became insolvent. In 1902, they moved to Melbourne and settled in Elsternwick. John Moore set up a business in Queen Street as an agent selling imported hardware from the UK and timber from Queensland. And now in his teens, Malcolm attended Caulfield Grammar. Albert Joseph Longoni was born in March 1889 in Helsau in the German-speaking part of Switzerland. This is young Albert with the family dog. His father, Joseph, was a contractor who owned a sandstone quarry. Later, his father ran a restaurant and became a wine merchant. Albert was the third of 8 children. This is the Longoni family in 1910. 21-year-old Albert is third from the left. Below is the street where the family lived. The Longoni family had a long history in construction. Albert's grandfather and uncle constructed many roads between towns in the northeast of Switzerland, and they also built a number of railway viaducts. The document on the right, in German, celebrates the centenary of the Longoni family in the construction business across 3 generations. While several of his siblings went into the hotel business, Albert became an engineer. Now, the fundamentals of engineering are the same everywhere. However, the way engineering is taught and which aspects are given prominence varies from country to country based on historical and cultural factors. Malcom Moore studied engineering at the University of Melbourne, while Albert Longoni attended the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. Both these institutions were undergoing significant transitions at the time. The type of engineering instruction experienced by Moore and Longoni differed in important ways. Moore completed degrees in mining engineering in 1911 and civil engineering in 1912. His curriculum was in the British tradition of pragmatic engineering training with a lesser emphasis on theoretical aspects than would have been the case in continental Europe. In the decade prior to Moore attending Melbourne, 2 royal commissions had begun to reshape engineering and the institution: the 1901 Review of Technical Education in Victoria and the 1904 Review of the Operation of the University. But even more fundamental changes occurred during his time at Melbourne. Henry Payne was appointed the Professor of Engineering at Melbourne in 1910. He was a reformer. Payne reviewed the programs and concluded that 2 fundamental subjects, electrical engineering and machine design, were absent. He also was concerned about the lack of laboratory work on prime movers, mechanical engineering and hydraulics. Payne set about correcting these deficiencies. There's a high correlation between the areas of Payne's curricular reforms and the technologies and techniques that later featured in the success of Malcom Moore. Longoni studied mechanical engineering at RTH Zurich. His transcript on the right reveals a curriculum strong on theory with lots of lab work and a focus on engineering design. RTH Zurich had been a local canton polytechnic, but in the early 1900s it underwent a major transformation to become the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, the MIT of Switzerland. As an integral part of his program, Longoni undertook a series of placements in industry. These included design work for companies in Switzerland and France and the commissioning of new production facilities, experience that would prove extremely valuable. You may have noticed the picture at the bottom. That's Albert Einstein. Looks something like Albert Longoni. But Einstein was one of Longoni's tutors at RTH Zurich. While at university, Longoni also undertook compulsory military service. Here he is, second from the left, seated, in his Swiss cavalry uniform with sword in hand. While in the militia, he was involved in a duel that left him with a permanent scar above his left eye. His obligation to undertake periodic military retraining followed him to Australia. So as late as 1929, he had to report regularly to the Swiss consulate in Melbourne. After graduating from university, Moore was employed in two quite different roles as a young engineer. First, he worked as an assistant engineer on the construction of the Bairnsdale to Albert Railway. Next, he was a manager at the munitions factory in Glasgow, Scotland during the First World War. These experiences of engineering practice laid the foundation for the company he would later form. Here's the route of the Bairnsdale to Albert Railway. And from the picture below, you can see it was fairly basic technology that they used. On the right is one of several commendations from the chief engineer for construction of the Victorian Railways, Maurice Curnow, recognising Moore's ingenuity. It was found that more economical use of a small grab bucket, a very efficient type of which was designed by Mr. Moore, assistant engineer, and by its use, the cost of excavation was largely reduced. Moore showed a propensity to adopt innovative approaches to improve efficiency and cost effectiveness in construction. Just note the word grab bucket. It will come back several times. In 1913, Moore applied for membership of the prestigious Institution of Civil Engineers UK. His application, on the left, is signed by Maurice Curnow from the Victorian Rails, but also by John Monash, amongst others. On the right is a timeline of Moore's engineering activities in Britain during the First War. I'll give you a second just to read through those. You'll notice that between his assignment in Glasgow and the one in London, his younger brother, John Hayward Moore, was killed in action in France in November 1916. His death hit the Moore family especially hard. His parents moved from Melbourne to Shepparton, where his father became an orchardist. This evocative painting on the left captures the atmosphere of the Cardonald projectile factory in Glasgow. The factory was built in double quick time, 9 months from turning the first sod to delivering the first munitions. As an assistant general manager at Cardonald, Moore learned about manufacturing processes and how to train and manage a new industrial workforce. Almost all the production machinery was operated by women. One of these women, Lizzie Robinson, was awarded the first medal of the Order of the British Empire for devotion to duty, working under very high pressure. And this is her on the right, receiving her medal in Glasgow from George V. It's reported that while at university, Longoni heard exciting stories about Australia from a fellow student. Other factors may have also contributed to his decision to emigrate. Whatever the reasons, he left Switzerland immediately upon completing his degree, arriving in Sydney in April 1914. On the same ship, the Benalla, was a young Danish engineer, Henning Metz. Metz and Longoni worked together on and off over the next decade. However, the timing of their emigration was unfortunate, with the start of the First World War only months away. Both became classified as resident aliens. Initially, Longoni found work as a design engineer in the cement industry. As you can see from his resume on the right, he moved around the country from coast to coast, following the available work, from outback New South Wales up to Brisbane, to Geelong, across to WA, then back to Port Pirie, and then back to Melbourne again. All this gave him valuable experience with large engineering projects under relatively primitive Australian conditions, from the feasibility to design to construction to final commissioning of the facilities. Much of Australia's cement had been imported, but the war accelerated local production of this basic material and provided Longoni with great opportunities. After a year at the Candos project in New South Wales, Longoni landed the job as engineer in charge of designer construction for the Queensland Cement and Lime plant in Darra, near Brisbane. Here he is 1916, aged 27 at his desk. Also shown are the rotary kilns he installed. He not only designed the cement making plant at Darra, but also the limestone quarry and crushing plant 170 kilometres inland at Gore. A bit of an echo back to his father's quarrying business. The plant produced 30,000 tonnes of cement a year, 3/4 of the pre-war consumption in Queensland. Henning Metz also worked on this project. And during this time, both of them met their future wives. Here's Albert Longoni and Ellen Anderson on the left, and Henning Metz and Ellen Larson on the right in Brisbane in November 1916. These two young ladies had emigrated together from Denmark to Brisbane in 1915. All four were considered aliens, and from 1916, each had to register with the police every time they changed their address. Below them, the picture of the couples is a page from the police register for Ellen Anderson, now Mrs. Longoni, when they moved from Perth to Port Pirie in September 1918. You can't read it clearly, but it says her nationality is described as Swiss by marriage. It's a different era. In July 1920, Albert Longoni applied to become a naturalised citizen. On the right, you can see his handwritten letter explaining his reasons for applying. Basically, so it was easier to get work. And he decided to make a home in Australia. When Moore arrived back in Australia in 1918, he stayed for a time with his parents in Shepparton. In 1920, he moved back to Melbourne to set up in business for himself as a consulting engineer and a manufacturer's agent. A year later, he formed a private company, Malcom Moore Pty Ltd, with two young engineers. Moore was not only enterprising in establishing this company, but also innovative in the new machines he designed. When he started out on his own, Moore rented an office at 17 Queen Street, the Lombard building, which is still there today, the same place where his father had operated his agent business. It takes time to grow a consulting business, so early on, Moore relied on selling products made by others. He was a prolific promoter of the multi-mix range of cement mixers, which you can see on the left-hand side. Moore applied for his first of his many patents in 1921. In an echo back to his railway days, it was for improvements to grab buckets. There you see it in the middle there. The same year, the Austral Otis Engineering of South Melbourne demonstrated a high-performance grab bucket crane designed by Moore and built by them. A number of these cranes were used in the construction of the Hume Reservoir, and that's indicated on the right. In November 1921, Moore partnered with Theodore Lloyd and Donald Baxter to form Malcom Moore Pty Ltd. Today, we would probably call this a tech startup. With offices at 31 Queen Street, the company competed for tenders to supply winches, cranes, dump trucks, small conveyors to the likes of Victorian Railways, the Electricity Commission, various harbour authorities. You can see some of those on the left. Between 1923 and 1927, Moore was granted 17 patents, 13 of which involved modifying tractors to perform all manner of tasks, as mobile cranes, as excavators, as saw benches, as road rollers, even locomotives. One of these tractor modifications was the first Australian front-end loader, illustrated on the lower right, and the patent is above it. And this is really a forerunner of the load haul dump vehicle you saw earlier. The directors of Malcom Moore also established the Tractor Appliance Company Limited, or TACL. Here's an arrow gauge locomotive made by TACL based on a Fordson tractor. You can see the basic tractor outline with the large gear used to drive the rear axle, the rail axle, replacing the usual tractor wheels. In the middle, note the distinctive diamond-shaped TACL nameplate. Malcom Moore used a similar style nameplate on their mobile equipment. By the mid-1920s, both companies operated out of the same premises at 501 to 503 Flinders Street, where Sea Life, the Melbourne Aquarium, now stands. Based on their success, in March 1927, Malcom Moore became a publicly listed company, Malcom Moore Ltd. This was so they could raise the capital needed to continue to grow the business. The £50,000 raised enabled them to build a fit-for-purpose factory on land acquired at Williamstown Road. The new company combined Malcom Moore and the Tractor Appliance Company. This is their original galvanised iron building, and you can see Malcom Moore Limited engineers on the side. During the 1930s, Longoni's career transitioned from building cement plants to pioneering the design of all welded mechanical structures. This was an era when iron and steel structures were put together by bolts and rivets. Longoni ran his own engineering consultancy. With an office in Aberdeen House, Collins Street, he offered service in civil and mechanical engineering. Henning Metz had an office in the same building. For some projects, Longoni partnered with Metz. On several occasions, he partnered with other engineers. In 1920, Longoni partnered with AGM Mitchell as the engineering consultants on a proposal to build a Portland cement plant on Maria Island off Tasmania. Mitchell, the senior partner, was well known for his invention in 1905 of the low friction thrust bearing that revolutionised large ship design. The major proponent for this project was John Monash. The project went ahead and Longoni was appointed chief engineer. He spent 6 months travelling across North America and Europe to source vital equipment and to sign contracts. He was accompanied on this trip by Alan and their one-year-old son, Albert Jr. Longoni's first association with Port Melbourne came in 1924 when he gave professional advice on a prospectus to purchase and expand the Syncrete brick and tile facility in Engel Street. Syncrete bricks are made from cinders and Portland cement, and they're less expensive than regular bricks. As many will know, the two-storey semi-detached bank houses in Garden City were built from Syncrete bricks. Longoni's transition to becoming an expert in the design of arc-welded structures began in the early 20s. 1923, the Metropolitan Gas Company built the world's first all-welded gas holder in North Fitzroy on the left. This initiative was led by Harry Grove of the gas company and supported by Quasi-Arc, the maker of electric welding equipment. Longoni became involved with these developments and applied the lessons to his own practice. He created a comprehensive set of design data for welded joints, aided by tests conducted at the gas company using the fairly primitive machine you can see on the right. Longoni's contribution to welding technology was not something that could be patented, so he chose to protect his intellectual property by copywriting it. The welding design charts on the left in blue were registered as a literary work. He also published at least one detailed technical paper, shown on the right. This paper was included in a major review conducted in the US in 1936 about the state of the art of welded joint design. So Longoni's work on welded joints had global significance. Moore and Longoni began to work together in the mid-1920s. Longoni remained an independent consultant who designed selected pieces of equipment for Malcom Moore on a contract basis. His unique contribution was the introduction of arc welding as a fabrication technique. This enabled stronger and more efficient structural elements to be made, thus expanding the size and capacity of cranes and conveyors that could be designed. So this is an early example of the all-welded crane designed by Longoni and manufactured by Malcom Moore in 1928. On the left, you can see a wagon transporting the slewing ring and the framework. I just love the houses in the background. While this machine is an evolution of the crane designed by Moore and built by Austral Otis in 1921, the lattice structure of the boom is something made possible by the all-welded fabrication methods that Longoni introduced. A couple of years later, Longoni designed this all-welded grab bucket and jib crane manufactured by Malcom Moore. The client was the Metropolitan Gas Company at West Melbourne, where the crane was used to manage the coal reserve. This is a more sophisticated machine with much longer boom reach than those attempted previously. If you look on the left lower, you'll see a horse-drawn cart, which gives you some idea of other technology of the day. But their big breakthrough came in 1932, when Malcom Moore won a tender against international competition to design and build a high-capacity facility to unload coal from ships at the West Melbourne Gasworks. This facility was completed in 1933. Account in the Herald of Longoni as he set the system in motion captures the sense of the occasion. With true engineering nonchalance, Mr. A.J. Longoni, supervising engineer for Malcom Moore Ltd, who installed the plant, blew a little whistle at North Wharf yesterday and set in motion the new mechanical handling machinery of the Metropolitan Gas Company. As 40 tonnes of coal were lifted by the grab and belt conveyed to the West Melbourne Gasworks, to the delight of 160 engineers and gas experts, Mr. Longoni told me this was not the first time he'd watched such a performance, for his job was to get things moving in just this way. The pair of grab bucket cranes, you can see them on the right of the picture, and these were believed to be the largest all-welded cranes in the world at the time. And the long conveyor runs diagonally across the picture and it carried the coal to the storage pile. It's fascinating to think that also in 1933, Moore applied for a patent for improvements to the horse-drawn plough. This patent on the left and the advertisement in a rural newspaper on the right speak to another side of the products being made by Malcom Moore at the time. When compared to the bulk materials handling technology at the gasworks, mechanisation in agriculture still had some way to go. In 1936, Longoni was invited to join the board of Malcom Moore Ltd and became the company's chief engineer. The success of the coal loader system in West Melbourne led to contracts to build comparable systems elsewhere in Australia, including 2 in Sydney. Longoni, on the left lower, patented improvements to conveyors, I should say. This was one of only 2 patents registered by Malcom Moore, the company, where Moore himself was not listed as the inventor. Arguably, the company made it through the Great Depression on the strength of the crane and conveyor business. The poster on the right is from the program of the Centenary of Port Melbourne in 1939. It shows the range of equipment made by Malcom Moore, and that includes the coal loader on the lower left. As their careers matured, both Longoni and Moore shared their expertise more broadly. Some of these efforts can be traced back to their earliest experiences of engineering practice. On several occasions, Longoni spoke of the lack of publicly available information for engineers and drafters on the design of welded structures. So in 1934, with the support of Quasi-Arc, he published a design manual, shown on the right, to disseminate his knowledge on welding. After he joined the company, he played a key role in developing the engineering design capability more generally at Malcom Moore's. Based on his experiences in Britain during the First World War, Moore gave a long interview to The Age in 1919 about the mutual responsibilities of management and workers. 20 years later, he was one of a group of prominent Melbourne industrialists who worked with the Melbourne Technical College, now the RMIT University, to create a program to develop the management abilities of foremen, that is to say, frontline managers. By 1939, this initiative had evolved to become the Australian Institute of Management, an organisation that still runs management courses today. The picture here is from an AIM event back in the day when management and men were synonymous. Presiding over the AGM of Malcom Moore New South Wales Proprietary Limited in September 1939, Longoni observed that the effects on Australian industry of the war, which had just been declared, were difficult to predict. As it turned out, Malcom Moore produced plant and equipment that supported the war effort in a variety of ways. Moore provides this summary of the wartime contributions of the company. Our cranes and transporters have faithfully served Australian munitions and armament industries. Our winches and locomotives went to the islands of the north. Our road machinery and front-end loaders helped to build airplane landing strips and great roads through Central Australia during the darkest days of threatened invasion. In addition, Moore served as an engineering consultant to the Commonwealth Department of Supply and as a member of the Australian Army Mechanisation Board. In March 1943, Longoni's only son, Albert Jr., was killed while flying his Beaufighter on a raid against Japanese shipping off New Guinea. He'd shown great promise as a future engineer. This included inventing an improved method to control aircraft while flying blind. His death had a profound and long-lasting impact on the family. When they first met, Moore and Longoni were in their mid-30s. Business opportunities and innovation were in the air. By the 1950s, the company had grown considerably in size, organisational complexity, and in product specialisation. Both men were now in their 60s. A new breed of manager was assuming the reins. Generational change was underway. Anticipating the opportunities presented by the post-war environment, in 1946, the company restructured as Malcom Moore Industries, a holding company with two separate operating divisions. By 1952, it had expanded to 5 divisions, each based on a type of product as listed in the lower left: cranes, conveyors, earth moving, etc. Longoni felt that these divisions should have been based on the type of production rather than the type of product. However, he lost this argument. He also disagreed with the splitting up of the engineering design function amongst the 5 divisions. The image in the background is a cover from a Malcom Moore promotional booklet in 1952. It's significant that it features the coal loaders from the West Melbourne gasworks. This is the final project that Longoni worked on, the creation of the coal export terminal at Gladstone in central Queensland in the early 1950s. This is a logical development from the West Melbourne Gasworks project 20 years earlier. Albert Longoni passed away in 1954, aged 65. The A.J. Longoni Award was created in his honour, presented each year to the best apprentice at Malcom Moore. Moore stepped down as chair of the company in 1952, and in 1955 he left the board to pursue his passions beyond manufacturing. He had had a long association with the Flying Doctor Service going back to the 1940s. For many years he was a counsellor and office bearer, and he served as its federal president between 1956 and 1958. He also became the president of the Australian Institute of Management between 1956 and 1958 and was a generous benefactor of the Institute. Malcom Moore passed away in 1969. He and his wife of 47 years, Anne McCowan, did not have any children. 1/3 of his estate went to support management education. The world was a different place during the time that Moore and Longoni exercised their considerable ingenuity. For one thing, coal was king. We were enthusiastically opening up coal export industry in Queensland and New South Wales. Yet I'm sure if they were starting out today, both Moore and Longoni would have been pioneering new technologies and future-focused industries, just as they did in their day, maybe in sustainable infrastructure or wind energy systems or new materials or advanced manufacturing. So nearly 70 years after they last worked together, what remains of the things they designed and built? This is the site of the former West Melbourne Gasworks, where the signature coal loading facility once stood. It's now part of Docklands. In the upper picture, you can see that facility and the 2 state-of-the-art coal loaders circled. The site is now occupied the ANZ headquarters with a marina where the coal ships once docked. Around the country, there are rusting reminders of many pieces of equipment made by Malcom Moore over the decades. This dozer in outback South Australia has the distinctive shaped Malcom Moore nameplate. Enthusiasts seek out these old machines made by Malcom Moore and the Tractor Appliance Company, and they're all over the web. One of the rotary kilns from the former Queensland lime and cement plant that Longoni designed and built now features as a riverside recreational park in Brisbane. Not quite sure what Longoni and Metz might make of this post-industrial design. But closer to home, the factory in Bertie Street that once produced Malcom Moore cranes now produces Starwood whiskey. You can see the distinctive circular MM sign on the upper right-hand corner of the building above Starwood. I like to think that Longoni and Moore would have approved of this creative repurposing. I think we should raise a glass to these two talented engineers. So thank you for your time and attention. I hope you found it interesting, informative, not too technical. And I want to particularly thank the grandchildren of Albert Longoni who have generously shared precious family photographs, documents, and letters with me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, David. Those two were absolutely remarkably creative men. And as you say, if they lived in this era, who knows what they would have been designing and creating to meet the needs of our society at the time. I did say that you were meticulous in your research, and you certainly have been, and it's greatly appreciated. Thank you. I'm sure there are some people, though, who would like to ask some questions, so I'll move it over to the members. There's one from Margaret, I think, to start with.
David, that was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. A wonderful presentation. And thank you. Fantastic.
Thank you.
And would it be John Lack?
David, thank you. That was absolutely fascinating. I've got a number of questions I'd like to ask you.
Mm-hmm.
Is scale of production important in this industry, or are they making single units for particular purposes, and how do they achieve their profits under whatever conditions they operate, whether they have to choose? I know with conveyor belts they'd be doing scale of production, but a lot of the other things seem to be, to an ignorant person, one-off things. So that's my first question. The second question is, in the Institute of Management, was Moore associated with John's story at all? And the third question is, what about employer-employee relations? How did he handle that? Did he have advanced views on that and in handling unionised bodies, if he did? And the fourth thing is, are they in the Australian Dictionary of Biography? And if they're not, they certainly should be, and you should be writing them.
Okay, so I'll try and answer these quickly without full explanations, just sufficient in reverse order maybe. So Australian Dictionary of Biography, yes, Moore is there. Longoni is not. In terms of unions, I think he was, you know, we're all prisoners of our own time and place. My reading is that Moore would have been reasonably enlightened. The interview, it's along another side conversation. The interview he gave in 1919 is fascinating in terms of his views about management and unions, and it was quite a balanced approach. In terms of AIM and John's story, yeah, well, absolutely. So there was a whole group of them there was involved in doing this. In fact, I think Malcom actually won the story medal at one point later on. So yes, that's involved. In terms of the one-off, the production thing is difficult to explain briefly, but things like the conveyor systems or the cranes, obviously they're one-offs, but conveyors have lots and lots of rollers, so there's lots of mass production of components, but whatever. And they're all quite different things, and that's really why I think they went into the holding company, the different types of things. Longoni wanted to have production sites because if you building things around it's an ongoing debate in manufacturing. Do you build on the product or do you build around the components? So that's a long other conversation. I could give, rather than give a long answer, I might just leave it there and we can pick it up at a later meeting if you want to. How's that?
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Ben has a question.
Yeah, David, that was an amazing bit of research, and I was wondering if you could just give us a quick idea as to the sort of things you did to find out that sort of information. I mean, you mentioned you got some stuff from the grandkids, but a lot of that stuff you wouldn't have been able to find on the internet. So how did you do it?
Well, actually, surprisingly, most of it, I mean, a lot of the talk wouldn't be there without the information I had from his grandchildren. Most of it, you know, it's brochures that they produced at the time. I couldn't get some of the things I wanted to get because of the lockdown. So there are things in various archives physically that I couldn't get my hands on. So that limited me a little bit. But sometimes it's about knowing how to join the dots or make the connections so that perhaps with an engineer's eye, I see something and I can think, oh yeah, I know what that is because I know something similar from somewhere else. And so it's as much about joining the dots to make the story as it is about finding all the pieces, if that makes sense.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. And Johnny May has a question as well, I think.
Thank you, David. Really enjoyed that. I noticed there that you put a lot of money into management ideas, and I can well understand that because I've spoken to a few people who've worked there, and also a fellow joined up in Sydney with him for 20 years, and he said it's a happy place to work, and everybody was made to feel like family. So I suppose it's a bit like happy wife, happy life. You get more out of employees that enjoy their work, and you're a smart man in more ways than one.
Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, thanks, John. As I said previously, I think he had a fairly enlightened views. His management was about frontline management, you know, foreman. In other words, the people on the ground, on the shop floor who make the moment-to-moment decisions that make all the difference, not the people sitting up in the plush boardroom. And they're the people that spot the issues as they're happening and can correct them. And so that's where he invested his money. That brief talk I gave about what they did during the war, what he gave during the war, the longer version of that includes him referring to the company as the family.
Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. I think Janet has a question as well.
Congratulations, David, a just fantastic presentation. I wondered where they got all the raw materials into the factory there in Port Melbourne. You know, what were they using to manufacture those things you've spoken about, and how would that have made its way there?
I mean, a lot of what they were building, so it's basically steel that would have been, you know, shipping in from, I'm not certain entirely whether they were coming from the likes of Newcastle or Wollongong and places. But they would have been using fairly basic things in the sense that they're using long lengths of simple cross-section pieces of steel for the cranes and the conveyors, and then they're machining up the rollers for the conveyors. They're converting you know, 3 parts of the business to do with the earth moving and the farming and so forth. They were all built around the tractors, so they essentially either brought in or assembled, partly assembled Fordson and other tractors, put them together, and then built the extra components that converted those basic tractors into whatever they were converting them into. If I had if I could easily put the slides back, but I won't. If you look at that locomotive part way through, that's pretty basic. It's just some bits of angle iron kind of bolted together around the, you know, so it wasn't, the early days was pretty simple stuff.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions before we let David go? The comments on the chat line have all said, expressed great appreciation, David, of your presentation. They said it's beautifully researched and beautifully presented. So thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Unfortunately, I can't give you a gift, but the gift will just be to say thank you very much for doing, coming along and presenting to us. It's greatly appreciated. I'll give you a virtual clap. Thank you.
Welcome.